It started with a knock at 2 minutes past 6 in the morning that did not ask for permission. Through the peephole, I saw a deputy sheriff, but the real threat was standing across the street. My parents were watching from the curb like this was opening night. The eviction notice in the deputy's hand proved someone had already been telling my life story in court without me in the room. They did not know the record is louder than manipulation. My name is Piper Holmes, and the end of my life as I knew it began at exactly 2 minutes past 6 in the morning. The sound that woke me was not the polite rhythm of a neighbor returning a borrowed cup of sugar, nor was it the hurried, cardboard thud of an early delivery driver dropping a package on the porch. This was metal striking wood. It was a hard, flat, rhythmic series of impacts that did not ask for permission to be heard. It was the sound of a knuckles rap amplified by a heavy ring, or perhaps the baton of someone who carried the weight of the state on their belt. It was a sound that bypassed the logic center of my brain and went straight to the primitive stem, sending a jolt of adrenaline through my veins that felt like ice water. I sat up in bed, the sheets pooling around my waist. The room was still dim, bathed in that color-draining gray light that exists before the sun actually breaks the horizon. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drum solo in a silent house. For a moment, I tried to rationalize it, a gas leak evacuation, a fire down the block. But the knocking came again, 3 sharp raps, louder this time. It was demanding, it was authoritative. It sounded like Judgment Day had arrived early and decided to start at my front door. I slid out of bed, my bare feet hitting the hardwood floor. The coldness of the varnish bit into my skin. I moved into the hallway, moving with an instinctive silence. I did not call out, "Who is it?" or "I'm coming." Something deep in my gut, a survival instinct I did not know I possessed until that very second, told me to be small, to be quiet, to be invisible. The house, which I had spent the last 5 years renovating with my own money and my own hands, felt suddenly foreign. The walls seemed to hold their breath. The shadows stretched out from the corners like accusatory fingers. It was as if the structure itself knew what was waiting on the porch and was already preparing to reject me. I reached the foyer. The knocking had stopped, replaced by a heavy, patient silence that was somehow worse. I pressed my eye to the peephole, the brass cold against my eyelid. The glass lens warped the world outside, bending the porch into a fisheye distortion. But the figure standing there was unmistakable. He was a deputy sheriff. I could see the tan uniform, tight at the shoulders. I could see the glint of the badge pinned to his chest, catching the weak morning light. He was looking down at a clipboard, a pen poised in his hand. Looking bored. He looked like a man who had done this 1,000 times before and would do it 1,000 times again before his shift ended. Behind him, in the driveway, his patrol car sat silent and dark. No flashing lights, no siren. He had not come to arrest a criminal. He had come to perform a bureaucratic excision. He had kept the lights off to avoid waking the neighborhood, a small mercy that felt more like an insult. He wanted this done quietly. Then, my gaze shifted past his shoulder, drawn by movement across the street. The air left my lungs. Standing on the opposite curb, right next to the neighbor's brick mailbox, were my parents, Evelyn and Grant Holmes. They were not panicking. They were not rushing toward the house in pajamas. Worried that something had happened to their daughter, they were fully dressed. My mother was wearing her Sunday coat, the navy blue wool one she wore to church when she wanted to impress the pastor. My father stood with his arms crossed over his chest, rocking slightly on his heels. They were watching my front door with the intense, focused anticipation of an audience waiting for the curtain to rise on opening night. They looked satisfied. That was the detail that broke me. There was no fear in their posture, only a grim sense of accomplishment. They were waiting to see me fall. The deputy raised his hand to knock again, but I was already undoing the deadbolt. My fingers felt thick and clumsy, fumbling with the brass latch. I cracked the door open 3 inches, catching it on the security chain. I needed that chain. It was a flimsy piece of metal, but it was the only thing separating my sanctuary from the force gathering outside. "Sheriff's office," the deputy said. He didn't look up immediately. He was checking a box on his paperwork. When he finally met my eyes through the crack in the door, his expression was completely blank. He was a wall of indifference. "Open the door. Please." "What is this?" My voice sounded strange to my own ears, thin, flat, and vibrating with a tension I was trying desperately to suppress. "Are you Piper Holmes?" he asked. He wasn't answering my question. He was verifying a target. "Yes," I said. "I am Piper Holmes." "I have a writ of possession for this property," he said, the words rolling off his tongue with practiced ease, "and an eviction order signed by Judge Sutter. You are being served." The words hung in the cold morning air like smoke. Eviction order, writ of possession. These were words that belonged to strangers, to people who didn't pay their rent for 6 months. To squatters, they did not belong to me. They did not belong to the woman who paid the property taxes, the woman who had the deed locked in a fireproof safe in the study, the woman who had spent $40,000 remodeling the kitchen last year. "There is a mistake," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming harder. "This is my house. I own this house." The deputy did not blink. He did not care. He shifted his weight, the leather of his gun belt creaking. "I am just executing the order, ma'am. The court has issued a judgment for possession. You need to open the door so I can clear the premises." "Who?" I asked. "Who filed this?" He flipped the page on his clipboard, scanning the top line. "Plaintiffs are listed as Evelyn Holmes and Grant Holmes." The names hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. I knew it, of course. I had known it the moment I saw them across the street, standing like vultures on the asphalt. But hearing it spoken aloud by a law enforcement officer made it real in a way that my mind refused to process. Evelyn and Grant Holmes. My parents. The people who had eaten Thanksgiving dinner at my table 2 months ago. The people who had told me how proud they were of my independence. I looked through the crack in the door, past the deputy, directly at them. My father must have seen the door open, because he nudged my mother. She straightened her coat. They didn't look away. They didn't have the decency to look ashamed. My father cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted across the quiet street. "Pack!" His voice was rough, cutting through the morning silence. "This is happening today. Piper, pack your things." It was the tone he used when he was directing movers or telling a contractor where to dump a load of gravel. It was a managerial tone. He was managing the destruction of my life. "You have got to be kidding me," I whispered. But the deputy heard me. "Ma'am," the deputy said, his voice dropping slightly, stepping out of his robotic delivery for a fraction of a second. "I need you to open the door. If you don't open it, I have the authority to call a locksmith or breach it. Do not make this harder than it needs to be. You have until noon to remove your essential items." "Noon?" I choked out. "That is 6 hours from now." "Noon," he repeated. "The lock change is scheduled for 1200 hours. You need to vacate." My mind was racing, spinning through 1,000 scenarios. How could they do this? I had the deed. I had the mortgage records. I had the bills. How could a judge sign an order without me ever stepping foot in a courtroom? How could a trial happen without the defendant? "I was never served," I said, looking at the deputy. "I never got a notice. I never got a court date. This is illegal." "That is a matter for the court," the deputy said, and his patience was thinning. "Right now, this is a valid order signed by a sitting judge. Open the door. Ms. Holmes." I looked at the chain. I looked at the wood of the door frame. I could slam it, I could lock it and scream, but I saw the gun on his hip, and I saw the absolute certainty in his eyes. Resistance now would just get me handcuffed. It would give my parents exactly what they wanted. A scene. They wanted to see me dragged out screaming. They wanted to paint me as the unstable daughter, the one who couldn't handle reality, the one who needed to be managed. I would not give them that. I slid the chain off. The metal rattled. A sound of surrender. I pulled the door open. The cold air rushed in, smelling of damp pavement and exhaust. The deputy stepped across the threshold. He didn't wipe his boots. He walked right onto the runner rug I had bought in Morocco, bringing the dirt of the street into my sanctuary. He handed me the stack of papers. They were heavy, thick, a coffin made of wood pulp. I looked down at the top page. Superior Court of the State, Unlawful Detainer, Default Judgment. The words default judgment stood out in bold. Black ink, that was the key. They had won because I hadn't shown up. And I hadn't shown up because I didn't know the game was being played. Pack. My mother's voice drifted from across the street, shrill and commanding. Don't drag this out. Piper. I gripped the papers so hard the edges crinkled. I wanted to run across the lawn and scream in their faces. I wanted to tear the papers up and throw the confetti in the air. But I stood still. I forced my breathing to slow down. In, out. In, out. The deputy looked around my foyer, taking in the framed photos, the vase of fresh lilies, the coat rack. He seemed to realize, perhaps for the first time, that this didn't look like a squatter's den. It looked like a home. It looked like a life. Do you have somewhere to go? He asked. His voice was softer now, stripping away the official veneer to reveal a tired man who didn't particularly enjoy throwing young women out of their homes at dawn. A friend? A hotel? I looked at him, then I looked past him to the couple across the street. My father was checking his watch. My mother was pointing at my second-story window, probably planning which curtains she would take down first. They thought this was the end. They thought the piece of paper in my hand was a period at the end of a sentence. They were wrong. It was just the opening bracket. I looked back at the deputy. My eyes were dry. My hands stopped shaking. The shock was receding, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. I didn't just need a place to sleep. I needed a war room. No, I said, my voice steady, low, and terrifyingly calm even to myself. Not until I see everything. I didn't wait for his permission. I turned my back on the open door, on the deputy, and on my parents. I walked into my kitchen, placed the eviction order on the granite island, and turned on the lights. I had 6 hours, and in those 6 hours, I wasn't just going to pack. I was going to find out exactly how they had buried the knife in my back, and I was going to figure out how to pull it out and use it. The adrenaline that had initially flooded my system was beginning to curdle into a cold, hard knot in the center of my chest. I stood at the kitchen island, the granite cool under my palms, staring down at the stack of paperwork that threatened to erase my existence from my own home. The deputy sheriff remained in the foyer, a silent sentinel in tan and black, giving me space but not freedom. He was the physical manifestation of the clock ticking down, but the real weapon lay on the counter before me. I did not scream. I did not throw the papers. I did not run out to the lawn to beg my parents for mercy. Instead, I forced my brain to switch gears. I moved from the part of me that was a daughter, hurt, betrayed, confused, to the part of me that solved problems for a living. I needed to understand the mechanics of the trap before I could figure out how to dismantle it. I need to see the return of service, I said. My voice was raspy, but it was steady. The deputy blinked, shifting his weight. He seemed surprised that I knew the terminology. Most people in this situation probably just cried or argued about fairness. I was asking about procedure. He stepped forward, his boots heavy on the floorboards, and flipped through the stack I had spread out. He tapped a page near the back with a thick finger. Right there, he said. Proof of service. I pulled the page closer, smoothing out a dog-eared corner. This was the document that claimed I had been notified. In the eyes of the law, you cannot lose your home without due process, without a chance to defend yourself. That meant I had to have been served these papers weeks ago. Since I had never seen them before this morning, a lie had to be written on this page. I just needed to find it. My eyes scanned the dense blocks of text, skipping over the boilerplate legal jargon until I hit the section regarding the location of service. My breath hitched. 410 Larkspur Lane. I stared at the numbers, willing them to change. 410 Larkspur Lane. The address was typed clearly in black ink. It was a valid address, but it was not this house. It was not even a house I had set foot in for over a decade. "This is the wrong address," I said, looking up at the deputy. "I do not live at 410 Larkspur Lane. I have not lived there since I was 19 years old. That was a rental property my parents owned. We lived there while this house was being fumigated years ago." The deputy shrugged, a gesture of helpless bureaucracy. "That is what is on the return. Ma'am, the court server went to the address provided by the plaintiff." "But I am standing right here," I insisted, gesturing to the walls around us. "I am in the house they are trying to evict me from. Why would they serve me at an old rental property across town?" The answer crystallized in my mind before the question even finished leaving my lips. It was not a mistake. It was a tactic. If they had sent the server here, to my actual home, I would have answered the door. I would have taken the papers. I would have called a lawyer. I would have fought the eviction in court. And I would have won because I own the house. But by sending the server to a ghost address, they ensured I would never know the clock had started. But a server cannot just leave papers at an empty house. Someone has to receive them, or they have to be posted in a specific way. I looked back down at the document, hunting for the method of delivery. There it was, a check mark in a box next to the words, "Substitute Service." And below that, in the section for the description of the person who accepted the papers, a single handwritten line that made my blood run cold. "Accepted by adult female occupant, Jane Doe. Refused to give name." "Adult female occupant," I whispered. I looked out the kitchen window. Through the blinds, I could see the silhouette of my mother, Evelyn, standing by the neighbor's mailbox. She was adjusting her scarf, looking toward my house with that practiced, serene patience. I understood it all in a flash of horrifying clarity. They had not just filed paperwork, they had staged a play. My parents still owned that rental on Larkspur Lane. They had keys. My mother must have gone over there, waited for the process server, a server they likely hired themselves or directed specifically, and opened the door. She had pretended to be the occupant. She had accepted the papers meant for me, playing the role of a roommate or a relative, effectively serving herself to sue me. It was brilliant. It was technically procedural fraud, but on paper, it looked perfect. The court saw a successful service. The judge saw a defendant who had been notified and chose not to show up. The default judgment was entered because I was fighting a battle I didn't even know had begun. "Do you see this?" I asked the deputy, pointing at the line. "Substitute service at a house my parents own. My mother is the plaintiff. She is also the one who likely opened the door to accept service. She served herself to evict me." The deputy looked at the paper, then at me. His expression softened by a fraction, the mask of authority slipping just enough to reveal a man who smelled a rat. But he shook his head. "I cannot make that call, ma'am," he said, and his tone was apologetic but firm. "I am not a judge. I do not review the evidence. I have a writ of possession that is signed and stamped. It orders me to remove all occupants from the premises. If you have a dispute about how service was handled, that is a motion you have to file with the court. It does not stop what is happening right now." "Is there a stay?" I asked, knowing the answer but needing to hear it. "Is there any pause on this?" "No stay," he said. "The order is immediate. I have to clear the house by noon." Noon. I looked at the digital clock on the microwave. It was 6:15 in the morning. I had less than 6 hours to pack up 30 years of life. But that was the trap, wasn't it? I looked back out the window at Evelyn and Grant. They knew me. They knew I was organized, proud, and fiercely independent. They knew that if a deputy showed up at dawn, my first instinct would be shock, followed by shame. They expected me to panic. They wanted me to throw things into garbage bags, weeping, and flee the scene to avoid the humiliation of being physically removed. They wanted me to leave the house. Once I was out, and the locks were changed, I would be on the outside looking in. I would be the crazy daughter claiming she owned the house. While they stood inside with the deed and the judgment, possession is 9/10 of the law, and they were 6 hours away from taking 100% of it. If I crumbled now, if I let the emotion take over, Their narrative would win. Piper was unstable. Piper couldn't manage her finances. We had to step in. I felt a cold calm settle over me, displacing the panic. It was a survival mechanism I had honed over years of navigating their gaslighting. Though I had never applied it to something this high stakes, the record is louder than manipulation. That was the rule. Okay, I said. I stood up straighter. I am not arguing with you. Deputy, I understand you have a job to do. He exhaled, visibly relieved that I wasn't going to make him drag me out in handcuffs. Thank you. I appreciate that. However, I said, I need you to stand right there for 1 minute. Do not touch these papers. I pulled my phone from my pajama pocket. I didn't dial a lawyer. Not yet. I opened the camera app. I am going to photograph every single page of this execution packet, I informed him. It wasn't a request. I need the case number. I need the seal. I need the judge's signature. And I definitely need this return of service with the Larkspur Lane address. Go ahead, the deputy said. Stepping back to give me light, my hands were steady as I hovered the phone over the documents. Click, the cover sheet. Click, the writ of possession. Click, the default judgment. I made sure the lighting was perfect. I made sure the text was legible. I zoomed in on the signature of Judge Lenora Sutter. I zoomed in on the date stamp. When I got to the return of service, I took 3 pictures, one of the whole page, one of the address, 410 Larkspur Lane, one of the recipient line, adult female occupant. These images were my lifeline. Once the deputy took these papers back, or once they got lost in the shuffle of the eviction, this proof might disappear. My parents relied on the chaos of the moment to hide the details. I was capturing the details in high definition. Done, I said, slipping the phone back into my pocket. You should start packing, the deputy advised. Essentials first, medications, documents, valuables. I am on it, I said. I walked past him, out of the kitchen, and down the hallway to the back of the house. I could feel the presence of the house around me. The photos on the wall, the rug I bought in Santa Fe, the smell of the lavender diffuser. It felt like a living thing that was being held hostage. I reached the back door. I checked the lock. It was engaged. I didn't just check it. I pressed my thumb against the deadbolt, feeling the cold metal. I turned the lock on the handle as well. It was a gentle, almost silent action. A slam would have signaled anger. A quiet lock signaled strategy. I was securing the perimeter. Even if the enemy was already inside the gates in the form of a court order, locking the door wouldn't buy me time against the deputy, but it bought me a psychological boundary against the people waiting across the street. They couldn't just walk in yet, not while I was still standing. I turned and walked into my study. This was the room my father hated. He called it wasteful to have a room dedicated to books and a desk when I could have had a guest bedroom for them. I walked straight to the closet. On the top shelf, behind a stack of winter sweaters, sat a heavy, fireproof bag. It was gray, nondescript, and fire-rated for temperatures up to 2,000 degrees. I had bought it 3 years ago after a wildfire scare in the next county. At the time, I felt paranoid. Now, I felt like a prophet. I pulled the bag down. It landed on the desk with a reassuring thud. I unzipped it. The smell of stored paper wafted out, dry and dusty. I reached in and pulled out the file labeled house. My hands touched the deed. It was the original grant deed, recorded 5 years ago. I opened it. There was my name, Piper Holmes, a single woman. There was the grantor, the estate of Arthur Miller, my grandfather. He had left me this house specifically to keep it out of my parents' hands. He knew, even back then, he knew. I pulled out the title insurance policy. I pulled out 5 years of property tax bills, all stamped paid with checks drawn from my personal bank account. I pulled out the homeowner's insurance policy, listing me as the sole insured. These were boring documents. They were the kind of paperwork you file away and forget about. They were dry, tedious, and utterly devoid of emotion. But as I held them in my hands, feeling the grain of the paper, they felt like the most powerful objects in the world. My parents had a story. They had a narrative about a daughter who couldn't cope, a family stepping in to save the asset. They had a fraudulent service at a fake address. I had the receipts. I placed the documents back into the fireproof bag and zipped it shut. I didn't pack clothes. I didn't pack toiletries. I didn't pack the jewelry my grandmother gave me. I packed the truth. I slung the heavy bag over my shoulder, the strap dug into my muscle, a physical reminder of the weight of what I was carrying. Noon, I said to the empty room. I had 5 hours and 40 minutes left. I wasn't going to spend them crying. I was going to the courthouse, and I was going to bring the one thing my parents never expected to see, the actual owner of the house. I stood in the kitchen, the silence of the house pressing against my ears. The deputy was still in the foyer, checking his watch, a silent reminder that my timeline was dissolving by the second. I did not engage him again. I had the photos on my phone, and I had the fireproof bag on my shoulder. Now, I needed the roadmap. I dialed the number for the Civil Division of the Superior Court. I knew the number not because I was litigious, but because I had looked it up 3 minutes ago while the deputy was staring at my ceiling. The phone rang. 1 ring, 2 rings. It was a hollow, electronic sound that seemed to mock the urgency thumping in my chest. "Civil Division," a voice answered. It was a woman's voice, clipped and efficient, the voice of someone who spent 8 hours a day managing the paperwork of other people's disasters. "I need to file an emergency motion," I said. My voice was steady, stripped of all tremor. I did not have time to be a victim. I had to be a litigant. "I have a sheriff's deputy in my living room with a writ of possession. I was never served with a lawsuit. I need to know the procedure to stop the lockout." There was a pause on the other end, followed by the clicking of a keyboard. "Do you have a case number?" "Yes," I said. I pulled the phone away from my ear, switched to the photo gallery, and read the number I had just captured from the deputy's clipboard. 26CV04981. One moment. The hold music was a staticky classical piece, distorted and tinny. I paced the small length of the kitchen, staying out of the deputy's line of sight. I looked at the microwave clock. 6:22 in the morning. The court opened at 8. I had a gap of time where I could do nothing but drive and panic, or drive and plan. The clerk came back on the line. "Okay, I see it. Holmes versus Holmes. A default judgment was entered last Tuesday. The writ was issued on Thursday." "I was not served," I repeated, emphasizing each word. "The proof of service lists an address where I do not live. It lists a substitute service that I never received. This is a fraudulent default. You can file a motion to vacate default and an ex parte application for a stay of execution," the clerk recited. She sounded like she was reading from a script, but at least she was giving me the weapons I needed. "You need to come down to the courthouse as soon as the doors open. You will need to file the motion, get it stamped, and then take the stamped copy to the sheriff's civil unit to stop the lockout." "If I file the motion," I asked, "does it automatically stop the deputy?" "No," the clerk said, and her tone dropped, losing its robotic quality for a brief, terrifying second. "The motion is just a request. The judge has to sign the stay order. Until the judge signs it, the writ is active." "So I have to beat the clock," I said. "If the writ is executed," the clerk said, and the gravity of her words seemed to lower the temperature in the kitchen. "It gets harder. Once possession turns over, you are the one on the outside asking to get back in. It is much harder to undo a lockout than to stop one. You need to get here now." "I am on my way," I said. I hung up. I did not look at the deputy as I walked past the kitchen archway. I did not go out the front door. My parents were out there, standing on the curb, waiting for the show. They wanted to see me emerge with tear-stained cheeks and a suitcase, defeated and compliant. They wanted the satisfaction of watching me walk past them so they could offer fake sympathy or a final, twisting remark. I would not give them that visual. I went to the back door, the one that led out to the narrow alleyway where the trash cans were stored. I unlocked it quietly, the tumblers sliding back with a soft click. I stepped out into the cool morning air. The sun was just beginning to burn off the gray haze, but the alley was still in shadow. I locked the door behind me. I knew the deputy would eventually open it from the inside to let the movers or the locksmith in, but for now, the house remained secured. I ran to my car, parked on the side street around the corner. I had moved it there last night because the driveway was being power washed. It was a stroke of luck I hadn't appreciated until this moment. My parents couldn't see me leave. I got in, threw the fireproof bag onto the passenger seat, and turned the key. The engine roared to life, a mechanical beast ready to run. I didn't speed. Not really. I couldn't afford a traffic stop. But I drove with a surgical precision, weaving through the early morning commuter traffic, every red light feeling like a personal affront. The courthouse loomed ahead, a massive block of concrete and glass that looked less like a hall of justice and more like a fortress. It was 7:45 when I pulled into the parking structure. I ran up the stairs, skipping every other step, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. A line had already formed outside the main entrance. People were standing in the cold, holding manila envelopes, clutching crumpled notices, looking tired and anxious. This was the line of people whose lives had hit a wall. I joined them, checking my watch. 7:50, 10 minutes until the doors opened. When the security guards finally unlocked the glass doors, the line surged forward. I moved with them, placing my bag on the conveyor belt. "Empty your pockets," the guard said. Bored, I put my keys and phone in the plastic bin. Then I took out the only other thing I had, the eviction notice picture on my phone screen. I held it up. "I have a lockout at noon," I said. The guard looked at the screen, saw the date, saw the time. He didn't smile, but he nodded. He pushed my bin through faster. "Go. Civil clerk is on the second floor. Room 201. I grabbed my things and ran for the elevators, but they were full. I took the stairs, 2 flights, taking them 2 at a time. I burst into the hallway on the second floor, just as the lights in the clerk's office were flickering fully on. There was a row of windows, most of them closed with heavy blinds. Only one was open. A woman sat behind the thick glass, organizing a stack of files. She looked exhausted, her eyes rimmed with the kind of fatigue that comes from years of dealing with desperate people. Her nameplate read M. Holloway. I walked up to the window. I did not shout. I did not cry. I placed my hands flat on the counter. "I need to see the file for case 26CV04981, I said. "And I need the forms for an emergency stay." "Ms." Holloway looked up over her reading glasses. She assessed me in a second. The lack of makeup, the intense focus, the fireproof bag. She typed the number into her computer. "Holmes versus Holmes?" she asked. "Yes, that is a closed case," she said. Judgment was entered. "It was entered fraudulently," I said. "I am the defendant. I am Piper Holmes. I am currently being evicted from a house I own, based on a lawsuit I never saw." She paused. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then she stood up and walked to the rotary file system behind her. The mechanism whirred as the shelves rotated. She pulled a thin red folder and walked back to the window. She opened it. "ID?" she asked. I pressed my driver's license against the glass. She compared the face to the woman standing in front of her. Then she looked down at the file. "Here is the proof of service," she said, tapping a document near the top. "I have a picture of it," I said. "But I want you to look at who signed it." She looked down. Her eyes scanned the standard boxes. Then they stopped at the bottom of the page. She frowned. She squinted, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was reading. "Recipient," she mumbled, reading the handwritten scrawl. "Evelyn Holmes." She looked up at the top of the page where the plaintiff was listed. Evelyn Holmes. She looked back at me. The fatigue in her eyes cleared, replaced by a sharp flicker of interest in the bureaucratic world. "Everything is gray, but this was a stark, glaring black and white violation. A plaintiff cannot serve the defendant, and a plaintiff certainly cannot accept service on behalf of the defendant at a secondary location." "She signed for her own lawsuit," the clerk whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of disbelief. "She served herself," I corrected. At a rental property she owns, while I was at home, living my life. Ms. Holloway didn't say anything for a long moment. She looked around the office, ensuring no supervisors were hovering directly over her shoulder. Then, she did something that probably violated 3 different protocols but saved my sanity. She took the proof of service document and placed it on the scanner. She printed a copy. She slid the paper through the slot at the bottom of the glass partition. Then she leaned forward, her voice barely audible through the speaker holes in the glass. "Highlight that," she said. "Highlight the name of the plaintiff and the name of the person who accepted service. It matters. The judge needs to see that first." I nodded, grabbing the paper. "Thank you." "There is more," she said. She flipped the page in the file. "Exhibit A, the rental agreement." "There is no rental agreement," I said. "I own the house." "Well," she said, turning the file so I could see through the glass. "According to this, you don't—" I pressed my face closer to the glass. There, stapled to the complaint, was a single-page document titled Residential Lease Agreement. It was a generic form, the kind you buy at an office supply store for $2. It listed Evelyn and Grant Holmes as landlords and Piper Holmes as tenant. The rent was listed as $1,000 a month, and at the bottom, there was a signature, Piper Holmes. I stared at it. It was loopy. It was shaky. It looked nothing like my sharp, angular signature. It looked like someone had taken a birthday card I had signed when I was 12 years old and tried to trace it onto a legal document, but their hand had slipped. It was pathetic. It was insulting. "That is not my signature," I said. The anger flared up, hot and bright, but I pushed it down. Anger was useless. Evidence was king. "That is a forgery." "You need to say that in your declaration," Ms. Holloway said. She handed me a packet of blank forms, the motion to stay, the motion to vacate, and a blank declaration form. "Fill these out, right now. Do not leave the window. Use the ledge. When you are done, hand them back to me immediately. I will walk them back to the judge's clerk myself." She wasn't just doing her job anymore. She was helping me. She saw the game. She saw the trap. "How much time do I have?" I asked, uncapping my pen. "The judge takes the bench at 9, she said. "If you get this in before 8:30, it goes to the top of the pile. If you miss that window, she might not see it until the afternoon break." "The afternoon break is too late," I said, already writing. "My house will be gone by then." "Then write fast," she said. I wrote. I didn't worry about poetic language. I didn't worry about flowery introductions. I wrote in bullet points. I wrote with the blunt force of a sledgehammer. 1. Defendant owns the property in fee simple. See attached grant deed. 2. Defendant was never served. Plaintiff Evelyn Holmes accepted service on defendant's behalf at a false address. 3. The lease agreement submitted as Exhibit A is a forgery. Defendant has never paid rent because defendant owns the home. My hand cramped, but I didn't stop. I filled out the case caption. I filled out the address. I filled out the emergency request. I slid the stack back under the glass. Ms. Holloway took them. She stapled my copy of the deed to the back. She stapled the highlighted proof of service to the front. "Wait here," she said. She disappeared into the back of the office, walking through a door marked Authorized Personnel Only. I stood alone at the window. The clock on the wall read 8:15. I closed my eyes and pictured my house. I pictured the deputy standing in my kitchen. I pictured my parents across the street. They thought they had won. They thought the paperwork was done. They didn't know that a woman named Ms. Holloway was currently walking down a hallway with a highlighted piece of paper that was about to turn their victory lap into a collision course. I opened my eyes. I was not leaving this counter until I had a court order in my hand. I leaned over the narrow ledge outside the clerk's window, the hard plastic digging into my ribs. My hand was cramping, but I forced my fingers to loosen their grip on the black ballpoint pen. Panic causes mistakes. Panic makes handwriting illegible. Panic makes you sound like a raving lunatic instead of a victim of fraud. I took a breath, held it for 3 seconds, and wrote, I made every letter distinct, vertical, and sharp. I was drafting a declaration in support of ex parte application to stay execution. It sounds fancy, but in reality, it was just a list of reasons why the sheriff should not kick down my door in 3 hours. I listed 4 points. I called them the 4 knives in my back. First, the service address was invalid. I wrote down that I resided at the property in question, not the rental property on Larkspur Lane. Second, and this was the one Ms. Holloway had highlighted, the plaintiff had signed the proof of service. Evelyn Holmes had accepted the papers intended for me. Third, the lease agreement attached to the complaint was a forgery. I stated clearly that no landlord-tenant relationship existed because I held the title. Fourth, I referenced my attached grant deed, proving fee simple ownership. I signed the bottom of the page. My signature was bold. It was the signature of someone who existed. I slid the paperwork back under the glass partition. Ms. Holloway took it. She didn't smile. She stapled the documents together with a satisfying thwack. She handed the bundle to a judicial assistant who had just emerged from the back office. The assistant was a young woman with a high ponytail and a tired expression. She took the file, flipped it open, and started walking back toward the judge's chambers. Then she stopped. I saw her pause mid-step. Her eyes had landed on the highlighted section of the proof of service. She blinked. She looked closer, bringing the paper up to her nose. Then she looked back at the window, right at me, with an expression that shifted from boredom to alarm. She didn't walk to the chambers. She practically jogged. Ms. Holloway looked at me through the glass. Go to Department 44, now. Judge Sutter is taking the bench. I ran. Department 44 was at the end of a long, polished hallway that smelled of floor wax and old decisions. I pushed through the heavy double doors and the change in atmosphere was immediate. The air was still and cold. The room was lined with dark wood paneling that seemed to absorb sound. And there they were, sitting in the front row of the gallery. On the right side were my parents. They looked impeccable. My mother had taken off her coat to reveal a modest, high-collared blouse. My father was wearing a blazer. They were holding hands. To a stranger, they looked like 2 heartbroken parents forced to do the unthinkable to save a wayward child. Next to them sat a man I recognized from their brag sessions, but had never met. Calvin Rusk. He was exactly as they had described. Silver hair perfectly coiffed, a suit that cost more than my car, and an aura of expensive reasonableness. He was the kind of lawyer you hired when you wanted to strangle someone legally. They turned when I walked in. My mother's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of genuine surprise breaking her mask. They didn't think I would make it. They thought I was at home, crying into a packing box. I didn't look at them. I walked straight to the counsel table on the left side, the defendant's side, and set my fireproof bag on the floor. All rise, the bailiff announced. Judge Lenora Sutter swept into the room. She was a woman in her 60s with short, steel-gray hair and glasses perched on the end of her nose. She didn't look at the audience. She looked at the files on her bench. She looked like a woman who had heard every lie ever told and was bored by all of them. Calling case number 26CV04981, Judge Sutter said. Her voice was dry. Holmes versus Holmes. This is an ex parte hearing regarding a stay of execution. Calvin Rusk stood up smoothly. Good morning, Your Honor. Calvin Rusk for the plaintiffs, Evelyn and Grant Holmes. I stood up. My legs felt like they were made of wood. Piper Holmes, defendant, representing myself. Judge Sutter looked over her glasses at me. Ms. Holmes, you have filed an emergency motion claiming improper service and fraud. You are asking me to stop a sheriff's lockout scheduled for 1,200 hours today. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, I said. My voice was clear. The courtroom acoustics amplified it, making it sound stronger than I felt. I have reviewed your declaration, Judge Sutter said. She picked up a piece of paper. My declaration. You claim you were never served with this lawsuit. I was not, Your Honor, I said. I woke up this morning to a deputy on my doorstep. That was the first time I learned of this action. The proof of service in the file states that papers were left at 410 Larkspur Lane. That is a rental property my parents own. I have not lived there for 10 years. I live at the subject property, where the deputy found me this morning. I reached into my folder. I have my driver's license and a utility bill from last month, both listing the subject property as my sole residence. The bailiff walked over, took the documents from my hand, and handed them up to the judge. Judge Sutter glanced at them, then turned her gaze to Calvin Rusk. Mr. Rusk, why was service attempted at a secondary address when the defendant was clearly living at the property you are trying to evict her from? Rusk didn't miss a beat. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, the picture of calm. Your Honor, my clients have had great difficulty communicating with their daughter. She has been elusive. They believed she was staying at the Larkspur address occasionally. They attempted service there in good faith. In good faith? Judge Sutter repeated. She picked up the highlighted proof of service. Mr. Rusk, who is the adult female occupant who accepted service at this elusive address? Rusk hesitated. It was a microsecond pause. But in a courtroom, it was an eternity. I believe it was an occupant of the home, Your Honor. It says here the recipient refused to give her name, Judge Sutter said. But the process server noted a description, and interestingly, the signature on the return receipt, which I'm looking at right now, appears to match the signature of your client. Evelyn Holmes, on the verification of the complaint. The judge looked directly at my parents. My mother squeezed my father's hand. She looked small. She looked victimized. Your Honor, my mother spoke up, her voice trembling just enough to sound fragile. We were just trying to help her. Piper has been unstable lately. We were worried about her living alone. We just wanted to bring her home. The label hung in the air. Unstable. It was the word they always used. It was the weaponized diagnosis. If I got angry now, if I shouted that she was a liar, I would prove her point. I would be the hysterical daughter yelling at her poor, concerned mother. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. I stood perfectly still. I looked at the judge, and I let the silence stretch. I let my mother's words hang there without a counter-argument, exposing them for what they were, an emotional deflection to a procedural question. Judge Sutter didn't look at my mother. She looked at Rusk. Counsel, the judge said, her voice dropping to a dangerous register. I am not asking about family dynamics. I am asking a procedural question. Did your client, the plaintiff, accept service for the defendant? Rusk sighed. He knew when he was cornered. It appears, Your Honor, that Mrs. Holmes may have been present at the Larkspur property when the server arrived. She may have accepted the papers to ensure her daughter received them. So the plaintiff served the defendant, Judge Sutter summarized, by handing the papers to herself. Technically, Rusk began. It is not technically anything, Judge Sutter snapped. It is improper. It is a conflict of interest, and it is grounds to quash service immediately. I felt a surge of relief so strong my knees almost buckled. It was working. The truth was working. However, the judge continued, and the word hit me like a splash of ice water. She picked up another document from the file, one I hadn't seen. Mr. Rusk has submitted a supplemental exhibit this morning regarding standing. She looked at me. Ms. Holmes, you claim you own this property. You stated in your declaration that you hold the grant deed. I do, Your Honor, I said. I have the original with me. That may be, Judge Sutter said. But the court has been presented with a quitclaim deed, recorded 2 weeks ago with the county recorder's office. She held up a document. It was a standard deed form. Even from 10 feet away, I could see the recording stamp in the upper right corner. This document, the judge read, purports to transfer title from Piper Holmes back to Evelyn and Grant Holmes. It is signed by you, Ms. Holmes, and it is notarized. The room spun. A quitclaim deed? 2 weeks ago? My voice faltered. I forced it back. May I see that, Your Honor? The bailiff brought the document to me. I looked at it. It was dated 14 days ago. It claimed that for the sum of $10, I, Piper Holmes, hereby remised, released, and forever quitclaimed the property to my parents. And there, at the bottom, was my signature. It wasn't the shaky, traced signature from the lease. This one was good. It was really good. It looked exactly like the way I signed my driver's license. It was a perfect copy. And next to it was the stamp of a notary public. Janine Rourke, Commission Number 21447. Your Honor, Rusk said, his voice smooth again, sensing the momentum shift. My clients did not want to bring this up, but since the defendant is claiming ownership, the house was returned to them. The eviction is merely to remove a tenant at sufferance who refuses to leave a property she no longer owns. My parents were looking at me. My father's face was unreadable. My mother looked sad, devastatingly sad, as if it broke her heart to reveal that I was a liar. I did not sign this, I said. I looked up at the judge. I didn't shout. I didn't plead. I spoke with the absolute, terrifying certainty of someone who knows reality has been broken. Your Honor, I did not sign this document. I have never met a notary named Janine Rourke. I was at work on the date this was supposedly signed. This is a forgery. It is a notarized document, Rusk said. It carries a presumption of validity. It is a lie, I said. Just like the service at the wrong address was a lie, they are escalating. Your Honor, they forged a lease, and when they realized I would fight that, they forged a deed. Judge Sutter looked at the deed. Then she looked at the proof of service she had already flagged as suspicious. She looked at my parents, who were perhaps looking a little too innocent. She dropped the deed back onto the bench. The presumption of validity, Judge Sutter said slowly, is weakened when the same parties have already admitted to playing games with the service of process. She looked at the clock. It was 8:55. I am granting the ex parte application for a stay of execution, she ruled. Rusk started to object. Your Honor, save it, Judge Sutter cut him off. The writ is stayed. The sheriff is ordered to stand down. Nobody is getting evicted today. I exhaled, a long, shuddering breath. However, the judge continued, pointing a finger at me, this deed is a serious matter. Ms. Holmes, if you sign this and are lying to the court, you will be facing perjury charges. If this is a forgery, then we have a felony on our hands. I welcome the scrutiny, Your Honor, I said. Good, Judge Sutter said. Mr. Rusk, I want this notary, Janine Rourke, in my courtroom. I want her here tomorrow morning at 8:30, and I want her to bring her notary journal. If this signature is valid, there will be a thumbprint and a log entry in her book. If there is no book, there is no deed. She looked at Rusk with a gaze that could cut glass. Do not tell me she is unavailable. Do not tell me she is sick. You produce the notary, or I will dissolve this judgment and refer your clients to the district attorney. Do we understand each other? Yes, Your Honor, Rusk said. He looked less smooth now. He looked like a man who had just realized his clients hadn't told him the whole story. Hearing set for tomorrow, 8:30, Judge Sutter said. Adjourned. She banged the gavel. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I grabbed my bag. I didn't look at my parents. I turned and walked out of the courtroom. I had stopped the bleeding. I had bought 24 hours. Now, I had to find a woman named Janine Rourke, and I had to prove that she and my parents had conspired to steal my life. I walked out into the hallway, pulled out my phone, and dialed the sheriff's civil unit to confirm they received the stay. My hands were shaking again, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was the cold, hard vibration of a hunt beginning. They had introduced a notary into the game. That was their mistake. A notary leaves a paper trail, and paper trails were the one thing I knew how to follow. I stepped out of the heavy wooden doors of Department 44, and the hallway air felt thinner, easier to breathe, but I did not let the relief settle in. Relief is a sedative, and I needed to remain sharp. The judge had signed the order. But a piece of paper on a bench is not the same thing as a command in the ear of the man holding the gun. I leaned against the marble wall, ignoring the passers-by, attorneys checking their smartwatches, defendants looking for the bathroom, and dialed the sheriff's civil unit. My hand was steady, but my grip on the phone was tight enough to whiten my knuckles. "Civil unit, Sergeant Miller." "This is Piper Holmes," I said, my voice clipping along at the speed of my thoughts. "I am the defendant in case 26CV04981. Judge Sutter just granted an emergency stay of execution. The lockout was scheduled for noon. I need you to confirm that the deputy on site has been notified to stand down." There was a pause, filled by the sound of typing. "I see the minute order just hit the system," the sergeant said. "Stay granted pending hearing. I am dispatching the update to Deputy Harrison now. He will not execute the writ." "Thank you," I said. "Please tell him I will be returning to the property shortly, but I have one more stop to make at the courthouse. He will clear the scene. Ma'am, you are safe to return." I hung up. Safe. That was a relative term. I was safe from the locksmith, but I was not safe from the lie. The lie was still recorded in the official history of the county, sitting in a database that said I had given away my inheritance for $10. I took the elevator down to the basement level, where the county recorder's office lived. This was the engine room of the property world. It didn't have the drama of the courtrooms upstairs. It had the cold, silent finality of archives. This was where truth was supposed to be preserved, but in my case, it was where the crime had been committed. I pulled a ticket from the kiosk and waited. The room smelled of ozone and old paper. When my number was called, A42, I walked to the counter. The clerk was a young man with thick glasses and a lanyard that read Senior Technician. He looked like he preferred data to people. That was perfect. "I need to place a fraud alert on a parcel," I said, sliding my driver's license and the certified copy of the stay order across the counter. "And I need to investigate a recording that happened 2 weeks ago. I believe it is a fraudulent conveyance." The clerk, whose name tag read David, looked at the court order. His eyebrows went up. A court order is the VIP pass in a recorder's office. It cuts through the red tape. "Parcel number?" he asked. I recited it from memory. 932-11008. David typed it in. The screen reflected in his glasses. "Okay. I see the quitclaim deed recorded on the 19th. Grantor Piper Holmes, Grantee Evelyn and Grant Holmes. Pull up the image," I said. "Please." He clicked the mouse, and the digital scan of the document filled the screen. There it was, the lie in high definition. I leaned over the counter, scanning the pixels. It looked official. It had the standard header, the correct margins, the recording stamp in the top right corner. But I wasn't looking at the format. I was looking for the flaw. "Zoom in on the notary block," I said. David zoomed in. The stamp of Janine Rourke filled the monitor. Janine Rourke, Notary Public, Commission Number 214479. I stared at it. "Can you cross-reference that commission number?" David opened a second window. He accessed the Secretary of State's notary database. He typed in the number. "That is odd," he muttered. "What?" "The commission number for Janine Rourke in the database ends in a 1. He said, 214471, but on the stamp here, he toggled back to the deed image. "It looks like a 9, but look at the curve." He zoomed in further, until the black ink became a landscape of jagged pixels. "That is not a 9, David said, his voice dropping to a whisper, the way people do when they spot a glitch in the matrix. "That is a 1 that has been closed with a pen. Someone drew a loop on top of the vertical stroke to make it look like a 9. I squinted. He was right. The ink density was different. The loop was slightly thicker, slightly darker than the stem. It was a manual alteration, done after the stamp was pressed but before the document was scanned. "Why?" I asked. "Why change the number?" "If the number was expired or suspended," David theorized, his mind working the logic. "The automated intake software might flag it. By changing the digit, they might have been trying to bypass a specific block on her real commission number. Or maybe they just made a mistake on the stamp itself and tried to fix it manually. And the system accepted it? I asked. David looked uncomfortable. He adjusted his glasses. The optical character recognition software is good, but it is not perfect. If the human reviewer was moving too fast, or if they saw a match on the name and ignored the digit mismatch, yes, it slips through. It slipped through, I repeated, and took my house with it. I can flag this, David said, typing rapidly now. I am putting a cloud on title note in the system. If anyone tries to record a mortgage or a sale against this parcel, it will trigger a manual review. They won't be able to cash out. Good, I said. Now, I need the metadata. David paused. The what? The intake metadata, I said. I know this system tracks more than just the image. I want to know who submitted this deed. Was it a walk-in? Was it an e-recording? What was the IP address? What was the timestamp? I need the digital fingerprints. I can't give you the IP address without a subpoena, David said, but I can give you the submitter profile. He clicked a tab labeled History. It was an e-recording, he said, submitted by a third-party service called Quick File Solutions, but the user account associated with the upload, he squinted. The user account is G-Homes-Real-Estate. My father, he hadn't even hired a title company. He had used a cheap online filing service, created an account, and uploaded the forgery himself from his home computer. He was so arrogant, so sure that I would never look this deep, that he didn't even bother to hide his tracks. Print it, I said. Print the zoomed-in image of the altered commission number and print the submission log showing that account name. David printed them. The pages were warm when he handed them to me. This is evidence of a crime, David said quietly as he slid the papers through the slot. I know, I said. Thank you. David, I left the recorder's office with a new layer of armor. I had the mechanics of the fraud. Now I needed the alibi. I walked out to the courthouse plaza and found a bench. I pulled out my phone and opened my work email app. I worked for Harborline Risk Solutions, a corporate data firm. We dealt in facts, in logs, in unshakable truths. It was ironic that my own life had become a case study for the very services we sold. I composed a new email. The recipient was Marcus Thorne, the head of physical security at our downtown office. Subject: Urgent personal security/legal request. Log retrieval. Marcus, I need a favor, and I need it to be official. I am currently involved in a legal dispute regarding identity theft and property fraud. I need to prove my physical location on Tuesday, the 19th of last month, between the hours of 8 in the morning and 6 in the evening. Please pull the following logs for my badge ID, P-Homes-4-4-9. 1. Parking garage entry and exit timestamps. 2. Building lobby turnstile swipes. 3. Suite 400 internal door access logs. If the retention policy allows, please also preserve any camera footage from the lobby turnstile at the time of my entry. I need a certified export of these logs by tomorrow morning for a court hearing. This is not a drill. My house depends on it. Piper. I hit send. I knew Marcus. He was a former military police officer. He didn't ask questions. He executed orders. If the data existed, he would find it. My phone buzzed 3 minutes later. It was Marcus. On it. Logs show you badged into the parking structure at 7:45 and didn't badge out until 18:30. You swiped into the suite 400 server room at 11:55. You were nowhere near a notary. Generating the PDF now. We'll check cameras. I let out a breath that I felt I had been holding since 6 o'clock this morning. The deed said I signed it 2 weeks ago, but the immutable laws of physics and digital tracking said I was 20 miles away, locked in a server room, doing my job. I drove home. When I pulled onto my street, the deputy's car was gone. My parents were gone. The neighborhood was quiet, basking in the deceptively cheerful afternoon sun, but the house looked different to me now. It wasn't just a home. It was a fortress that had been breached. I parked in the driveway and walked to the front door. The lock looked the same, but I knew my key was no longer the only one that mattered. My parents likely had a copy, or at least they thought they had the right to drill it out. I called a locksmith I'd used for the renovation. "I need a rekey," I told him. "Oh, exterior doors, high security. Today, I will pay double for the rush." He arrived in 20 minutes, while he worked, drilling out the cylinders and replacing them with heavy-duty deadbolts that felt like bank vault mechanisms. I went to work on the digital perimeter. I climbed the ladder to the eaves of the porch. I reset the Wi-Fi camera that had been glitching for months. I synced it to my phone. I added a second camera pointing at the driveway and a third pointing at the back alley. I set the motion sensitivity to maximum. I created a new folder on my cloud drive labeled CASE_26CV04981. I uploaded the photos of the eviction papers. I uploaded the photos of the altered notary stamp. I uploaded the screenshot of Marcus's email. I was building a digital wall, brick by bite. The locksmith finished at 5. I paid him $300 in cash and took the new keys. They were heavy, jagged, and unfamiliar. I locked the door from the inside. I slid the chain, the same chain I had opened this morning, back into place. The sun went down, casting long shadows across the living room floor. I didn't turn on the main lights. I sat in the glow of my laptop, organizing the timeline. January 19. Fraudulent deed uploaded by G. Holmes. Jan 19. Piper Holmes at work. Badge logs. Jan 25. Default judgment filed. Feb. 3. The knock. It was a timeline of betrayal. At 9:12 in the evening, my phone lit up on the coffee table. It wasn't a call. It was a text message. The number was unfamiliar. No caller ID. Just 10 digits from a prepaid burner code. I picked it up. The message was short, brutal, and designed to trigger the very fear I had suppressed all day. "If you show up tomorrow, you'll lose more than a house. Walk away while you can still walk." I stared at the glowing letters. It was a physical threat. Lose more than a house, while you can still walk. It was the kind of message sent by people who realized the legal route was failing and were reverting to something primal. My hand didn't shake. The fear was there. Yes, a cold prickle at the base of my neck. But it was drowned out by a cold, hard rage. They were threatening my physical safety now. They were trying to scare me out of the courtroom because they knew they couldn't win inside of it. I didn't reply. Engaging was what they wanted. They wanted a reaction they could use. Instead, I took a screenshot. I emailed it to myself. I saved it to the folder. Evidence item number 12. Witness intimidation. I put the phone down. I checked the camera feed on my laptop. The street was empty. The new locks were engaged. The file was backed up. I wasn't going to walk away. I was going to walk right into Department 44 at 8:30 in the morning, and I was going to bring the entire burning building down on top of them. I turned off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness, and waited for the dawn. The morning sun had barely begun to scrape against the horizon when the doorbell rang. It was not the heavy, authoritative knock of the deputy sheriff from the day before. This was a persistent, rhythmic chime, the sound of a finger pressing the button and refusing to let go. It was the sound of entitlement. It was the sound of people who believed that boundaries were things that applied to other people, not to them. I checked the time on my phone. 6:45 in the morning. I did not jump out of bed with the same heart-stopping panic as yesterday. Yesterday, I had been a victim. Today, I was a litigant. There is a profound difference in the chemistry of those two states. I slid my feet into my slippers and walked to the monitor I had set up on my desk the night before. The screen flickered to life, showing the feed from the new wide-angle camera mounted above the porch. There they were. Evelyn and Grant Holmes, my parents. They were not standing across the street by the neighbor's mailbox this time. They were right on the welcome mat, crowding the lens. My father was wearing a golf polo and slacks, looking for all the world like he was just stopping by for a casual visit, except for the tight, angry line of his jaw. My mother was standing slightly behind him, wringing her hands, her eyes darting toward the street as if checking for witnesses. The doorbell rang again. Ding dong, ding dong. I walked out of the bedroom and down the hallway. The house was silent, save for the electronic chime echoing through the foyer. I stopped at the front door. I could hear them breathing on the other side. I could hear the rustle of my father's windbreaker. I did not unlock the heavy new deadbolt. I did not slide the chain. Instead, I pressed the button on the intercom system that synced to the camera. "I am not opening the door," I said. My voice came out of the speaker outside, tinny but clear, on the monitor. I saw them jump. They hadn't expected the camera. They expected me to yell through the wood. Or better yet, to fling the door open in a rage. "Piper," my father said, leaning in close to the door. He used his reasonable voice, the one he used to talk down to waitresses and customer service representatives. "Open the door. We need to talk before the hearing. There is no need to drag this out in public." "There is nothing to talk about," I said, staring at the screen. "You filed an eviction. You forged a lease. You recorded a fraudulent deed. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a crime. Lower your voice," my mother hissed, stepping closer to the wood. "The neighbors will hear you." "Let them hear," I said. "You were perfectly happy to let the neighbors see a deputy sheriff throw me out yesterday. Why are you shy now?" "We are trying to protect you," my father said, and the audacity of the statement almost made me laugh. "You are not thinking clearly. You are overwhelmed. We just want to manage the asset for the family. Grandpa wanted it in the family. Piper, he built this house for the home's legacy, not for you to squander." The mention of my grandfather was a tactical error. It was the spark that burned away the last of my hesitation. "I am the family," I said. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, speaking directly into the microphone. "Grandpa left the house to me, specifically to me. He excluded you from the will. Dad, do you remember that? He knew you would sell it to the first developer who waved a check at you. He left it to me because I am the only one who actually cares about the legacy." "You are being selfish," my father snapped, his mask slipping. "You are one person living in a 4-bedroom house. It is a waste of capital." "It is my home," I said, "and you tried to steal it with a fake notary stamp." There was a silence on the porch. It was a heavy, pregnant pause. They knew I knew. They just didn't know how much I knew. "Piper," my mother said, and her voice shifted gears. She went from scolding to pleading, a transition she had perfected over 30 years. It was the voice that used to make me apologize for things I hadn't done. "Honey, please, don't do this. Don't ruin lives over paperwork. We can fix this. We can go to the lawyer and sign a new agreement. We can work something out where you stay in the guest suite. Just drop the motion. If you go into court and say those things about the deed, you are going to cause a lot of trouble for everyone. Don't ruin lives over paperwork." That sentence hung in the air, vibrating with a grotesque irony. They had tried to ruin my life with paperwork. They had weaponized the court system, the sheriff's office, and the county recorder to make me homeless. They had treated legal documents like magic spells to banish me, but now that I was holding the paperwork, suddenly it was just a triviality. Suddenly, it was just paperwork that shouldn't stand in the way of family. "I am not ruining lives," I said, my voice ice cold. "I am just reading the record. And speaking of the record, the judge ordered Janine Rourke to appear tomorrow at 8:30. She needs to bring her notary journal." I watched the screen. My mother's hand went to her mouth. My father stiffened. "If she really notarized my signature," I continued, "then there will be a thumbprint in her book. There will be a log entry. There will be nothing to worry about. But if that book doesn't exist, or if my print isn't in it, then she is going to prison. And since you are the beneficiaries of the fraud, you will be right there with her." "You ungrateful little—" my father started, raising a fist to pound on the door. "Smile," I interrupted. "You are on video. And this footage is going straight to Judge Sutter as Exhibit C." My father froze. He looked up at the camera lens, his face twisted in a mixture of rage and sudden, dawning fear. He realized, finally, That he wasn't standing on his own porch. He was standing on a hostile witness stand. He grabbed my mother's arm. "Let's go." "But Grant," she started. "I said let's go," he snarled. He pulled her down the steps, but before they reached the sidewalk. My mother turned back. She looked at the camera, her face pale, and she delivered one last parting shot. It wasn't a plea this time. It was a hook, designed to catch in my skin and drag me down into the mud with them. "You think you are so smart," she called out, her voice shrill. "But you can't fight the bank. Wait until you see what we did with the equity. You are fighting for a shell. Piper, it's already gone." Then they got into their car, my father's pristine silver sedan, and drove away. I stood by the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. What we did with the equity structure. My mind raced. Had they taken out a loan? A mortgage? You can't take out a mortgage on a house you don't own, unless you have a recorded deed saying you own it. I ran back to my desk. I pulled up the fraud alert I had filed with the recorder's office. There were no new liens recorded yet. But that didn't mean they hadn't tried. Or maybe they had signed a promissory note that was sitting in a queue somewhere, waiting to be processed. I needed to secure the perimeter, not just the physical one, but the legal one. I opened my email. I typed in the address of my best friend, Sarah. Sarah wasn't a lawyer. She was a nurse, but she was meticulous. And more importantly, she was loyal. She was the witness I needed, a third party who held the data so that even if my house burned down or my laptop was stolen, the truth would survive. Subject: Evidence backup. Do not delete. Sarah, attached is a video file from my doorbell camera dated today, February 4th, at 6:45 in the morning. It contains footage of my parents admitting to the existence of the dispute and threatening the equity of the home. Also attached is a screenshot of a threatening text message I received last night. If anything happens to me, or if I am unable to attend court tomorrow, give this folder to Judge Lenora Sutter in Department 44 immediately. I am safe. I am just being careful. Love, Piper. I hit send. The progress bar whooshed across the screen, and I felt a tiny knot of tension release in my chest. The evidence was off-site. It was out of my hands and into the cloud. Now, I had work to do. My mother's threat about the equity was terrifying. But it was also a confession. It confirmed that the motive wasn't just control, it was money. They needed cash. Maybe my father's investments weren't doing as well as he bragged. Maybe they were leveraged to the hilt. They saw my house, free and clear. Thanks to Grandpa, as a piggy bank they could smash open. I sat down at the kitchen table. I cleared away the remnants of my untouched breakfast. I placed my laptop in the center. To the left, I placed the printed badge logs from Marcus. To the right, I placed the printed copy of the forged deed. I was going to build a timeline. A timeline is a weapon. In a court of law, stories are fluid, memories are fallible. I think I was there is weak. But a timeline, backed by metadata, is a steel cage. I needed to construct the cage for Janine Rourke and my parents. I opened a fresh document. I titled it, Defendant's Chronology of Events, January 19th. The forged deed was dated January 19th. The notary block claimed that on that day, I, Piper Holmes, appeared before Janine Rourke and signed the document. I looked at the badge logs Marcus had sent. Entry 1, time, 0745, location, Parking Garage B, Entry Lane, 2, ID, P-Holmes-4-4-9. I typed it into the document. 7:45 a.m. Defendant arrives at Harborline Risk Solutions. Vehicle enters secure garage. I looked at the next line. Entry 2, time, 0752, location, Lobby Turnstile, North Tower, ID, P-Holmes-449, 7:52 a.m. Defendant enters building. Security footage available upon subpoena. I went through the day, minute by minute. I found a swipe at the 4th floor break room at 10:30. I found the critical swipe at the server room door at 11:55, 5 minutes before noon. The notary stamp on the forged deed didn't have a time. But standard business hours for a notary are 9 to 5. And Janine Rourke's office address, which I had looked up online, was in a strip mall in the suburbs. 45 minutes away from my office in downtown traffic. I did the math. To appear before her, I would have had to leave work, drive 45 minutes, sign the deed, and drive 45 minutes back. That was a 90-minute round trip. Minimum. I scanned the badge logs for a 90-minute gap. There wasn't one. My longest gap was 40 minutes for lunch, during which I had swiped back into the suite twice to use the restroom. I typed out the conclusion in bold letters at the bottom of the page. It was physically impossible for the defendant to be present at the notary's location on the date of execution. I printed the timeline. I stapled the badge logs to the back of it. This was Exhibit D. I looked at the stack of folders on my table. Exhibit A, the highlighted proof of service, self-service. Exhibit B, the altered commission number on the notary stamp. Exhibit C, the doorbell video on a USB drive. Exhibit D, the alibi timeline. It was a fortress of paper. I sat back, the chair creaking in the silent house. It was only 2:00 in the afternoon, but I felt heavy, not sleepy, but heavy with the sheer density of the betrayal. It takes a lot of energy to hate your parents. It takes even more energy to outsmart them. My mother's voice echoed in my head. What we did to your equity. I picked up my phone and called the bank where my grandfather had held the original trust. I navigated the automated menu until I got a human being. I need to check if there have been any inquiries on the title of my property, I told the representative. I am the owner. I cannot give out specific details on pending applications, the banker said, his voice guarded. But I can tell you that if you have a fraud alert on your credit and the property title, any new application would be automatically flagged for manual review. Has anything been flagged? I asked. There was an inquiry yesterday, he admitted. A home equity line of credit application. It was suspended due to the data mismatch on the ownership records. Suspended, I repeated. Not approved? No, ma'am. Suspended. We cannot lend against a title that is in dispute. I closed my eyes and exhaled. They had tried. They had walked into a bank, probably with that wet ink deed in their hands, and tried to cash out $100,000 or more. If I had been one day late, if I hadn't gone to the recorder's office yesterday, they might have gotten away with it. They might have drained the equity and left me fighting for a mortgage shell, but they were too late. Thank you, I said to the banker. Please leave the flag on, indefinitely. I hung up. I organized the papers one last time. I put them into the fireproof bag. I placed the bag on the dining table, right in the center, where the morning sun would hit it. It looked like a shield. It looked like armor. I walked to the windows and checked the locks again. I checked the camera feeds. Everything was secure. I looked at the clock. It was 8 in the evening. I should eat dinner. I should prepare a statement. But my body was telling me something else. My parents were counting on me being exhausted. They were counting on me being the frantic, sleepless, unstable daughter who showed up to court with dark circles under her eyes and a tremor in her voice. They wanted me to look like a mess so they could look like the saviors. The most rebellious thing I could do right now was to be well rested. I went to the bathroom and brushed my teeth. I washed my face, scrubbing away the oil and the stress of the day. I put on fresh pajamas. I crawled into bed. The sheets were cool. The house was quiet. I closed my eyes and visualized the courtroom. I visualized Judge Sutter. I visualized Janine Rourke sitting in the witness stand with her empty journal. I didn't count sheep. I counted badge swipes. 0745, 0752, 1155. I fell asleep with the numbers marching through my head like soldiers, guarding the truth until the sun came up. I walked into Department 44 at exactly 8:40 in the morning. The air in the courtroom was different than the day before, yesterday. It had been a place of chaos and emergency, a room where I was scrambling to stop a bleeding wound. Today, it was a surgical theater. The air conditioning was humming a low, steady bass note, and the light filtering through the high windows was sharp and unforgiving. I did not carry a heavy bag this time. I carried a single, slim black folder. Inside were the timeline, the badge logs, and the printout of the altered notary stamp. I didn't need to clutch it. I held it lightly at my side, because the truth does not need to be gripped white-knuckled to remain true. I took my seat at the defendant's table. The wood was cool under my hands. Then, they walked in. My parents had changed their costumes. That is the only way to describe it. Yesterday, at my front door. My father had worn a golf polo and a windbreaker, the uniform of a man in charge of his domain. Today, he was wearing a soft beige cardigan and slacks that looked slightly too loose, giving him the appearance of a frail, confused grandfather. My mother, who had worn a sharp navy coat during the eviction attempt, was now draped in a floral blouse with a high collar and a pink knit sweater. She looked harmless. She looked like a woman who baked cookies for the church fundraiser, not a woman who forged deeds to steal houses. They had dressed for a tragedy. They wanted the judge to look at them and see two elderly victims being harassed by an ungrateful child. They sat down at the plaintiff's table, moving with exaggerated slowness, but they were not alone. Sitting in the row behind them, separated by the low wooden railing of the gallery, was a woman I had never seen before in my life. She was small, with frizzy brown hair pulled back in a severe clip. She wore a gray suit that looked uncomfortable, the fabric bunching at the shoulders. She clutched a purse in her lap with both hands. Her fingers laced together so tightly the skin was mottled red and white. This was Janine Rourke, the notary. She did not look like a master criminal. She did not look like a conspirator. She looked like a woman who was slowly realizing that the walls of the room were moving inward. She kept her eyes fixed on the back of my father's head, as if he were a life raft in a storm. But my father did not turn around. He did not acknowledge her. He stared straight ahead at the empty bench, distancing himself from the tool he had used to break the law. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Lenora Sutter," the bailiff announced. Judge Lenora Sutter took the bench. She moved with a brisk, lethal energy. She did not shuffle papers. She did not look tired. She sat down, adjusted her glasses, and looked directly at the plaintiff's table. "Calling case Holmes versus Holmes," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried to the back of the room without effort. "We are here on the defendant's motion to stay execution and the court's own inquiry into the validity of the underlying title documents." Calvin Rusk stood up. "Good morning, Your Honor. Calvin Rusk for the plaintiffs." "Good morning," the judge said. But she didn't look at him. Her gaze shifted to the woman in the gray suit. "And I presume this is Ms. Rourke?" Rusk turned, gesturing with a smooth, practiced hand. "Yes, Your Honor, this is Janine Rourke, the notary public who memorialized the deed in question. She is here voluntarily to clear up this misunderstanding." "Voluntarily," the judge repeated. The word dripped with skepticism. "Come forward. Ms. Rourke, take the stand." Janine stood up. She bumped her knee against the bench in front of her, a hollow wooden sound that echoed in the quiet room. She murmured an apology that nobody heard and walked through the gate. She looked terrified. As she passed my table, I caught a whiff of her perfume, something floral and cheap, masking the sour smell of anxiety. She sat in the witness box. The bailiff swore her in. She raised her right hand, but it shook so visibly that she had to use her left hand to steady it. "Ms. Rourke," Judge Sutter began, skipping the pleasantries, "you notarized a quitclaim deed on January 19th of this year, transferring property from Piper Holmes to Evelyn and Grant Holmes. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Janine said. Her voice was a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Yes. Do you have the original deed?" the judge asked Rusk. Rusk walked forward and handed a document to the bailiff. "The original, Your Honor." Judge Sutter took the deed. She didn't look at the text. She looked at the stamp. She pulled a magnifying glass from her drawer, a heavy brass-rimmed instrument, and held it over the paper. The silence in the room stretched out. taut as a wire. We all watched her inspect the ink. "I see the stamp," Judge Sutter said, lowering the glass. "Now, Ms. Rourke, do you have your notary journal?" The room seemed to hold its breath. Calvin Rusk stepped forward. "Your Honor, with respect, the journal is not necessary. The deed itself is prima facie evidence of the transfer. The notary is here to testify that—" "Mr. Rusk," the judge said. She didn't shout. She didn't even raise her voice. She just stopped him with a tone that suggested he was dangerously close to a cliff edge. "In this state, a notary is required by law to maintain a journal of all official acts. When allegations of fraud are raised, the journal is not optional. It is the primary evidence. Do not tell me what is necessary in my courtroom." Rusk shut his mouth. He nodded stiffly and sat down. Judge Sutter turned back to Janine. "The journal, Ms. Rourke." Janine reached into her large tote bag. Her movements were jerky. She pulled out a black, hardbound book. It was thick. It looked heavy, like a brick. She held it for a second, her knuckles white, as if she were debating whether to throw it or run with it. Then, she handed it to the bailiff. The bailiff carried it to the bench. It was a short walk, maybe 10 feet, but it felt like the book weighed 50 pounds. He handed it to the judge. Judge Sutter placed the book on the bench. She opened it. The spine cracked. In the silence of the courtroom, the sound was like a pistol shot. "January 19th, the judge said, flipping through the pages. Flip, flip, flip. My parents were frozen. My mother was staring at her hands. My father was staring at the judge, a vein pulsing in his temple. "Here we are," the judge said. "January 19th, line 4. She ran her finger across the page. "Transaction. Quitclaim deed," she read. "Signer, Piper Holmes." She looked up at me. "Ms. Holmes, please stand." I stood up. I kept my face neutral. I was the statue of justice, minus the blindfold. "Ms. Rourke," the judge said, looking back at the witness. "When a signer appears before you, you are required to verify their identity using a government-issued ID. What form of ID did you verify for this transaction?" Janine licked her lips. A driver's license, Your Honor." "A driver's license," the judge repeated. "And you recorded the details of that license in your journal?" "Yes," Janine said. "I always do." "Read the entry, Your Honor." I said. It was the first time I had spoken. My voice was calm, cutting through the tension. Judge Sutter looked down at the book. "The journal lists a driver's license number ending in the digits 428. She paused. She looked at the paper I had submitted yesterday, the photocopy of my license. Then she looked at me. "Ms. Holmes," the judge said, "what are the last 3 digits of your driver's license number?" I didn't need to look at my wallet. I didn't need to check my notes. 991, I said. 991, the judge repeated. She looked back at the journal. 428. The numbers hung in the air. 428, 991. They were not close. They were not a transpose error. They were not a smudge. They were completely different integers. Rusk jumped up. "Objection. It could be a clerical error. Your Honor, a simple mistake in transcription. People write down wrong numbers all the time. That does not invalidate the signature itself." "A clerical error?" Judge Sutter asked. Her eyebrows went up. "Mr. Rusk, writing a 7 instead of a 1 is a clerical error. Writing a completely different sequence of numbers suggests that the person recording them was looking at a different card entirely, or perhaps no card at all." She turned her eyes back to Janine. The notary was shrinking in her chair. She looked small enough to disappear into the upholstery. "Ms. Rourke," the judge said, "let us move past the numbers for a moment. Let us talk about the event itself." The judge leaned forward. Her black robe rustled. "You stated that Piper Holmes appeared before you," the judge said. "You stated you checked her ID. You stated she signed this book." "Yes," Janine whispered. Did you witness her sign it? The question was simple, 5 words, but they were the 5 words that stripped away all the legal maneuvering and left only the raw, naked truth. Janine started. Her voice cracked. You are under oath, Judge Sutter reminded her. Perjury is a felony. Did you witness the woman standing at the defendant's table, Piper Holmes, sign this book and that deed on January 19th? Janine's eyes darted to the side. It was a reflex. It was an instinct she couldn't control. She didn't look at her lawyer. She didn't look at the judge. She looked directly at the plaintiff's table. She looked at my parents. She looked at my father with a desperate, pleading expression that screamed, "You said this would be easy. You said she wouldn't fight. You said I was safe." My father refused to meet her gaze. He stared straight ahead. His jaw locked so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. My mother was looking down, picking at a loose thread on her sweater, distancing herself from the woman she had likely bribed with a fruit basket and a sob story. The judge saw the look. The bailiff saw the look. I saw the look. It was the look of a conspiracy collapsing. "Let the record reflect," Judge Sutter said, her voice dropping to a register of absolute coldness, "that the witness is looking to the plaintiffs for guidance." Janine snapped her head back to the judge, her eyes wide with panic. "No, I just—" "Ms. Rourke," the judge said, "I am going to ask you one more time. And before you answer, I want you to look at Ms. Holmes. Look at the defendant." Janine turned her head slowly. She looked at me. I met her gaze. I didn't look angry. I didn't look scary. I just looked like a person who was actually there. I let her see the reality of me, the person whose life she had almost destroyed with a rubber stamp. I let her see that I was not a signature on a page. I was a woman who had driven to work that day, who had eaten a salad at her desk, who had walked into a server room. I was real, and because I was real, her lie could not hold me. "Did you see me?" I asked her, softly. "Did you see me sign that book?" Janine's lip trembled. She started to cry. It wasn't a sob. It was a silent, leaking defeat. Tears spilled over her lower eyelids and tracked through the powder on her cheeks. "No," she whispered. The word was so quiet it barely registered. But in that room, it sounded like a thunderclap. "I cannot hear you," Judge Sutter said. Janine closed her eyes. She took a breath that shuddered in her chest. "No," she said, louder this time. "No, I didn't see her." "Then who signed the book?" the judge asked. Janine opened her eyes. She didn't look at my parents this time. She looked at her hands, clenched in her lap. "Mr. Holmes brought it in," she said. Her voice was flat, the voice of someone who has given up. He said his daughter was sick. He said she was in the car and couldn't come in. He said she had already signed the deed. He brought the license. He said it was a family matter. He said it was just a formality to keep the property in the trust. "And you notarized it anyway," the judge stated. He has been a client for 20 years, Janine said. A pathetic defense. I didn't think she would mind. I thought I was helping." "You thought you were helping," Judge Sutter repeated. She sat back in her chair. She looked at the deed on her desk. She looked at the journal. Then she looked at Calvin Rusk. Rusk was staring at his table. He knew it was over. He was already mentally packing his briefcase. "Mr. Rusk," Judge Sutter said, "do you have any cross-examination?" Rusk stood up slowly. "No, Your Honor." "I didn't think so." The judge turned to my parents. My father was no longer looking straight ahead. He was slumped in his chair, his face a mottled red. My mother was weeping, holding a tissue to her nose. But nobody was offering her comfort. The frail, elderly act had dissolved, replaced by the ugly reality of 2 people who had just been caught holding the smoking gun. Judge Sutter picked up her gavel. She didn't bang it yet. She held it like a weapon. "The court finds," she began, dictating to the court reporter. that the quitclaim deed recorded on January 19th is a forgery. The court finds that the notarization was fraudulent. The court finds that the plaintiffs, Evelyn and Grant Holmes, suborned this fraud. She looked at me. Ms. Holmes, she said, the stay is no longer temporary. I am vacating the default judgment immediately. I nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. But the judge wasn't done. She turned back to Janine Rourke. Ms. Rourke, you are to remain in this courtroom, she ordered. The bailiff will escort you to the holding area. I am referring this matter to the Secretary of State for immediate revocation of your commission, and I am referring this transcript to the District Attorney's Office for potential criminal charges. Janine put her head in her hands and sobbed. And as for the plaintiffs, Judge Sutter said, her eyes boring into my parents. Mr. Rusk, I suggest you advise your clients that they are currently sitting in a very dangerous position. They came into my court, filed a false lawsuit, submitted a forged lease, and relied on a forged deed. That is not just a lost case. That is contempt. That is perjury. And that is conspiracy. My father looked up. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not the annoyance of a plan thwarted, but the primal fear of a man realizing the cage he built for someone else was closing around him. The room was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the suspense of the unknown. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of total ruin. And I sat in the middle of it, my folder closed, watching the ink dry on the record. The verbal admission from Janine Rourke had sucked the oxygen out of the room. But in a court of law, a tearful confession is good, but hard data is better. A confession can be recanted later. A confession can be blamed on pressure. I needed the lock to be so tight that not even a laser could cut through it. I stood up. I did not wait for permission. The momentum of the room was swinging like a wrecking ball, and I intended to guide it. Your Honor, I said, my voice cutting through the sounds of Janine's sniffling. To support the witness's statement that I was not present, I would like to submit Exhibit D into evidence. These are the certified security logs from my employer. Harborline Risk Solutions, dated January 19th. I walked to the bailiff and handed him the thin, terrifyingly accurate stack of papers. He walked them to the bench. Judge Sutter took them. She adjusted her glasses, her eyes scanning the columns of data. These logs, I continued, speaking for the record, track every movement I made that day. They are time-stamped to the second. They are immutable. Judge Sutter looked up from the logs. She turned her gaze back to Janine Rourke, who was now sitting in the witness box looking like a pile of gray laundry. The judge wasn't done with her. She wanted to nail the corners of this coffin shut. Ms. Rourke, the judge said. Her voice was deceptively casual, the tone of a predator toying with wounded prey. You stated earlier that Mr. Holmes brought the document to you, but I want to be very specific about the timeline. What time of day did this alleged notarization take place? Janine hesitated. She looked at the ceiling, then at her hands. It was around lunchtime. I remember because I was about to close up for my break. Lunchtime, Judge Sutter repeated. So, roughly noon? 12 o'clock? Yes, Janine said. Around 12 or 12:30? 12:30, the judge said. She looked down at the paper in her hand. She ran her finger down the column of black ink. That is interesting. She turned the document around so that the gallery and my parents could see it. According to this log from the Harborline server room, Judge Sutter read aloud, at 12:22 in the afternoon, Piper Holmes was swiping her security badge to access a secure interior door at her office in downtown. That is 22 miles away from your notary office in the suburbs. The judge looked over her glasses. Unless the defendant has the ability to teleport, Ms. Rourke, she could not have been standing in front of your desk while she was simultaneously unlocking a server room across the county. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a lie disintegrating against the hard wall of physics. Janine started. She looked frantic now. The vagueness of, I don't remember, wasn't an option anymore. The journal said one thing. The laws of space and time said another. I might have been wrong about the time. Maybe it was earlier. Maybe it was 10. At 10 o'clock, the judge interrupted, reading from the next line. Ms. Holmes was logged into a video conference in conference room B. We have the IP logs for that, too. Then later, Janine cried out, her voice rising in pitch. Maybe it was 2 o'clock. I see a lot of people. I can't remember every face. But you remember the driver's license? Judge Sutter snapped. You remember the family matter? You remember the specific conversation about the daughter being in the car? Janine stopped. Her mouth opened and closed. She was trapped. Every door she tried to open led to another wall of evidence. Ms. Rourke, the judge said, and her voice dropped to a register that made the hair on my arms stand up. I am going to ask you one last time, and I want you to think very carefully about your answer, because the district attorney is going to be reading this transcript before lunch. Did you witness Piper Holmes sign that deed? Janine looked at the judge. Then, her eyes darted uncontrollably toward the plaintiff's table again. I followed her gaze. My mother, Evelyn, was sitting rigid in her chair, but her right hand, resting on her knee under the table, was moving. She was making a small, sharp cutting motion with her finger. Cut it. Stop talking. Stick to the script. It was subtle. It was the kind of signal you give a child across a dinner table. Mrs. Holmes, Judge Sutter barked. My mother jumped. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a wax figure. If you signal the witness one more time, the judge said, pointing the gavel at her like a weapon, I will have you taken into custody right now for witness tampering. Do not move a muscle. My mother froze. She didn't breathe. She didn't blink. She sat there, paralyzed by the sudden realization that she was no longer the matriarch of the family. She was a suspect in a courtroom. The judge turned back to Janine. Answer the question. The dam broke. No, Janine wailed. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was a cry of self-preservation. No, I didn't see her. I never saw her. She pointed a shaking finger at my father. He brought it in, she shouted, abandoning all loyalty. Grant brought it in. He told me it was already signed. He said Piper was busy. He said they were just fixing the trust. He promised me it would be fine. He said, Janine, do this for me, and I will make sure the renewal on your lease is handled. He is my landlord. I rent my office from him. The revelation hit the room like a bomb. It wasn't just a favor. It was leverage. My father was her landlord. He had pressured his commercial tenant to commit a felony. He said it was just paper, Janine sobbed, her face buried in her hands. He said nobody would ever check. He said Piper wouldn't care. My father sat like a stone statue. He didn't look at Janine. He didn't look at me. He stared at the empty space in front of him, his eyes dead and hollow. The facade of the benevolent father, the wise investor, the head of the household, it was all gone. All that was left was a desperate man who had bullied a woman into a crime and got caught. Judge Sutter watched the breakdown with an expression of cold disgust. She let Janine cry for a moment, letting the sound of the confession soak into the court reporter's recording. Then, she moved. The record is clear, Judge Sutter said. She grabbed her pen and began writing on the file with forceful, angry strokes. The default judgment entered against the defendant is hereby vacated. The writ of possession is dissolved effective immediately. The unlawful detainer case is dismissed with prejudice. She looked up, her eyes locking onto Calvin Rusk. Mr. Rusk, your case is dead, and frankly, your career might be limping after this if you knew anything about it. I did not, Your Honor, Rusk said quickly, stepping away from his clients as if they were radioactive. I assure the court, I was unaware of the provenance of the deed. We will see, the judge said. She picked up a separate form, a referral sheet. I am making a judicial finding of fraud upon the court, she announced, her voice ringing off the wood paneling. I am referring the plaintiffs, Evelyn and Grant Holmes, and the notary, Janine Rourke, to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into conspiracy, forgery, filing false documents, and attempted grand theft of real property. She stamped the paper. Thump. I am also forwarding a complaint to the Secretary of State's Notary Division regarding Ms. Rourke's commission. It is suspended pending investigation. She cut her eyes toward my parents, just long enough to pin them in place. Mr. and Mrs. Holmes, she said, you came into my courtroom seeking the power of the state to evict your daughter. You have instead invited the scrutiny of the state into your own affairs. You are no longer plaintiffs. You are now subjects of a criminal inquiry. My mother let out a small, strangled sound. She reached for my father's hand, but he pulled it away. He knew. He understood the math better than she did. He knew that investigation meant audits. It meant subpoenas. It meant they weren't just losing the house. They were losing their reputation, their standing, and possibly their freedom. This hearing is concluded, Judge Sutter said. Ms. Holmes, you may go home. It is your house, and if anyone tries to touch a doorknob on that property again without your permission, call the police and show them this order. Thank you, Your Honor, I said. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I felt a profound, exhausting hollowness. I picked up my folder. I turned to leave. I had to walk past the plaintiff's table to get to the exit. I had to walk within 2 feet of them. My mother looked up at me. Her eyes were red, rimmed with mascara and tears. She looked old. For the first time in my life, she didn't look scary. She just looked pathetic. Piper, she whispered. It was a reflex. She was trying to call me back, to fix it, to tell me to stop the bad man from hurting them. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I didn't even look at her. I looked straight at the exit sign, glowing red above the double doors. I walked past them. I walked past the lawyer who was frantically packing his bag. I walked past the notary who was being approached by the bailiff. I pushed open the doors and stepped out into the hallway. The air was cool. The noise of the courtroom cut off as the heavy doors swung shut behind me. It was over. The lie had collapsed. The record was set. But as I stood there, adjusting the strap of my bag, I realized something. Winning didn't feel like triumph. It felt like survival. I had kept my house, but I had lost the last lingering illusion that I had parents. I had evicted them from my life just as surely as they had tried to evict me from my home. And honestly, the silence was already starting to feel like peace. The sound of victory was not a cheer. It was not a gavel banging. It was the heavy mechanical thunk of a certification stamp hitting the bottom of a court order. I stood at the clerk's counter in the civil division, 10 minutes after leaving Department 44. The adrenaline that had carried me through the hearing was beginning to metabolize into a deep, vibrating exhaustion. But I refused to sit down. I refused to go home. A judgment is just words in the air until it is certified, recorded, and distributed to the people who carry guns and keys. I need 5 certified copies, I told the clerk, and I need an abstract of judgment. 5? The clerk asked, pausing with the stamp hovering over the paper. That is $50 a copy, ma'am. I do not care about the cost, I said. I want one for the sheriff, one for the recorder, one for the bank, and 2 for my own archives. I want them embossed. The clerk nodded. She understood. She brought the stamp down. Thunk. She signed her name. She crimped the paper with the raised seal of the Superior Court. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Each impact felt like a nail being driven into the coffin of my parents' scheme. I paid the $250 with my debit card, took the stack of heavy, warm paper, and walked out. I held them against my chest. They were my shield. My first stop was not the house. It was the basement level again, the county recorder's office. I needed to close the loop I had opened yesterday. David, the technician who had helped me find the altered notary stamp, was at the window again. He looked up as I approached, and a flicker of recognition crossed his face behind his thick glasses. "You came back," he said. "I came back with a court order," I said. I slid one of the certified copies through the slot. Judge Sutter vacated the default judgment. She declared the quitclaim deed a forgery. I need to record this order immediately against the parcel number. I want it to sit right on top of that fake deed so that anyone who pulls the title sees the word void in capital letters. David picked up the document. He read the ruling. He let out a low whistle. She referred them to the district attorney? That is heavy. Record it, I said. And I want to confirm that the fraud alert is still active. It is active, David said, typing rapidly. I am scanning this in now. It will appear in the index within 20 minutes. Once this is recorded, that quitclaim deed is dead. It is legally null. The chain of title reverts to you, sole and separate. Good, I said. Lock it down. David, if anyone tries to record anything else, a lien, a trust deed, a mortgage modification, I want to know. You will get an email notification, he promised. I left the recorder's office and walked across the plaza to the sheriff's civil unit. This was the most practical stop. The court system and the enforcement system are two different beasts, and sometimes they do not talk to each other fast enough. I wasn't going to risk a shift change leading to a deputy showing up at my door because he hadn't checked his email. I went to the window. I need to update the file on an eviction, I told the sergeant. The writ has been dissolved. I handed over the second certified copy. The sergeant looked at the case number. We got the minute order from the court, he said. The lockout is canceled. I know it is canceled, I said, but I want you to put a flag on the address. I want you to put a note in the dispatch system that any request for removal at this address is invalid unless it comes with a new order dated after today. The sergeant looked at me, then at the fierce set of my jaw. He typed a note into the file. I put a verify order flag on the location. No deputy will touch it without calling the supervisor first. Thank you. I walked back to my car. It was only 11 in the morning. I had dismantled the legal threat, but the silence from my parents was unnerving. They had been humiliated in open court. They were facing criminal charges. People like Evelyn and Grant Holmes do not retreat when they are cornered. They lash out. They try to find a side door. I got into my car and checked my phone. There was a notification from the title monitoring service I had subscribed to yesterday. Alert. Document submission blocked. My heart skipped a beat. I tapped the notification. Time, 10:45 in the morning. Type, deed of trust / request for notice of default. Submitter, Rapid Cash Lending Group. Status, rejected, due to fraud flag. I stared at the screen. 10:45. That was 20 minutes after the hearing ended. That was while my parents were walking out of the courtroom. They hadn't gone home to reflect on their sins. They had gone straight to the phone. Or more likely, this was an automated submission that had been queued up to fire as soon as they thought the eviction was done. I looked at the document type. Deed of trust. That is a mortgage. That is a loan. Everything suddenly snapped into focus. The desperation, the sloppy forgery, the 6 a.m. eviction, the threat about the equity. They weren't just trying to take the house because they were controlling narcissists. Although that was part of it, they were trying to take the house because they had already spent the money. They had applied for a hard money loan, a high-interest, fast cash loan used by flippers and desperate people. They probably used the forged quitclaim deed to prove ownership to the lender. The lender was ready to fund, likely hundreds of thousands of dollars, but they needed to verify occupancy. They needed the house empty. They needed me gone so the appraiser could walk through and certify the asset. If I had been evicted at noon today, the lender would have funded the loan by tomorrow. My parents would have taken the cash, and I would have been left fighting a bank for a house that was now leveraged to the hilt. But because I had placed the fraud alert, and because I had just recorded the court order, the lender's final check failed. The system rejected the filing. The money was gone. They weren't just in legal trouble. They were broke. And now, the bridge they had tried to build to their financial salvation had just collapsed into the river. I felt a cold, grim satisfaction. They had tried to sell my future to pay for their mistakes, and I had cut the wire at the last second. But this realization brought a new danger. Desperate people with no money and looming criminal charges are volatile. They had nothing left to lose. I started the car and drove. I didn't go home. I drove to the family court building, 3 blocks away. I wasn't done with the paperwork. I was building a wall so high they would never see the top of it. I went to the restraining order clinic. I took a packet of forms for a civil harassment restraining order. I sat at a metal table and filled them out. I wrote down everything. I listed the fraudulent lawsuit. I listed the forged deed. I listed the attempt to evict me using the sheriff. I listed the text message from the burner phone. If you show up tomorrow, you'll lose more than a house. I described the incident at my front door yesterday morning. The repeated ringing, the refusal to leave, the threats about the equity. I attached the transcript of today's hearing, which I had ordered on an expedited basis. Showing the judge's finding of fraud and conspiracy, I wrote in the declaration, "The respondents have demonstrated a willingness to commit felonies to target the protected person. They have threatened my physical safety and my financial ruin. They have lost their legal standing, and I believe they will escalate to physical harassment." I filed the request. The clerk told me a judge would review it within 4 hours. I finally drove home. The house looked different in the afternoon light. It looked like a survivor. I parked in the driveway, staring at the new locks on the door. I walked up the path, checking the cameras. They were recording. I went inside and locked the door. I engaged the deadbolt. I engaged the chain. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID said, "Sheriff's Dispatch." My stomach tightened. Had they found a loophole? "This is Piper Holmes," I answered. "Ms. Holmes, this is Deputy Harrison," the voice said. It was the same deputy who had stood in my foyer yesterday morning, the man who had been ready to throw me out. His tone was different now. It was respectful, almost conspiratorial. "Yes, Deputy. I just wanted to let you know," he said. "I got a call transferred from dispatch about 20 minutes ago. A man identifying himself as Grant Holmes. He was asking for the status of the lockout." I gripped the phone. "What did he say?" "He tried to tell me there was a mistake," Harrison said. "He said the judge was confused. He said the order was just a temporary stay and that we should proceed with the eviction because he had the original writ. He was very insistent. He wanted me to come over there and finish the job." My father, even after the judge had referred him to the district attorney, even after the fraud was exposed, he was still trying to bully the world into bending to his will. He thought he could talk a deputy into overriding a judge. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him that I had a certified copy of the dismissal order on my desk," Harrison said. "I told him the writ was void, and I told him that if he called my line again regarding this property, I would file a report for filing a false police report and harassment. I told him he needs to speak to his lawyer, not the sheriff." "Thank you, Deputy," I said. "I appreciate you telling me." He sounded desperate. "Ma'am," Harrison added, "keep your doors locked." "They are locked," I said. I hung up. Desperate. Yes, that was the word. At 5 o'clock, the email arrived. I was sitting at my computer, backing up the files from the day, the scans of the certified orders, the receipt from the recorder's office. The notification slid onto the screen. Sender: Evelyn Holmes. Subject: Please read. Important family matter. I hovered the mouse over the subject line. Part of me wanted to delete it unread. Part of me wanted to print it out and burn it. But the litigant in me, the version of Piper Holmes born in the fire of the last 48 hours, knew better. Data is data. I opened it. My dearest Piper, I am writing this because your father is too upset to speak. We are both in shock over what happened today. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. The lawyer failed us. He didn't explain things properly to the judge. We never wanted to hurt you. We were trying to protect the trust. We were trying to make sure the house was safe for your future. The deed was just a formality to help us secure a loan to pay for some medical bills your father has been hiding from you. We didn't want to worry you. Please, Piper, you have to stop this. The district attorney is calling us. You can't let them do this to your parents. You need to call the judge or the prosecutor and tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you gave us permission. If you don't, your father could go to jail. Is that what you want? To put your father in jail over a house? We are a family. Families forgive. Please call me tonight. Love, Mom. I read it twice. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. It hit every note. The victimhood, lawyer failed us. The altruism, protect the trust. The secret tragedy, medical bills. The guilt trip, is that what you want? And finally the demand for me to perjure myself to save them. Tell them you gave us permission. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking me to become an accomplice after the fact. She wanted me to call the district attorney and lie. She wanted me to say, "Yes, I signed it. I just forgot." She wanted me to take the fall for their felony so they could keep their social standing. They still didn't get it. They thought I was the same Piper they had manipulated for 30 years. They thought that if they pushed the family button hard enough, I would fold. But the button was broken. They had smashed it with a hammer when they sent a deputy to my door at 6 in the morning. I moved the cursor to the reply button. My finger hovered there. I could write back. I could tell them exactly what I thought of their misunderstanding. I could tell them about the badge logs. I could tell them about the loan application I had blocked. I could scream at them in digital all caps. But that would give them something. That would give them a reaction. That would give them an opening to argue, to plead, to twist my words. The record is louder than manipulation, and the loudest record of all is silence. I moved the cursor away from reply. I clicked forward. I typed in the email address for the district attorney's fraud unit, which I had looked up earlier. Subject, FWD, admission of motive/attempt to suborn perjury, case 26CV04981, to the district attorney. Please see the email below from the suspect. Evelyn Holmes, received today at 5:15 p.m. In this email, she admits the motive for the forgery was to secure a loan. She also explicitly asks me to contact your office and provide false information to obstruct your investigation. I am not responding to her. Piper Holmes. I hit send. Then I went back to the original email. I clicked the folder icon. I dragged the email into the folder labeled Case Evidence. I closed the laptop. The house was quiet. The sun was setting, casting long, peaceful shadows across the floorboards that belonged to me. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I drank it standing at the sink, looking out at the backyard. They would keep trying. For a little while, they would call. They would knock, but they were ghosts now. They were noise on the other side of a very thick wall. I had built the wall with paper, with timestamps, and with the absolute, unshakable truth. I wasn't waiting for the next knock. I was ready for it, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of who was on the other side. The days that followed the hearing were not filled with shouting matches or dramatic confrontations. They were defined by the quiet, relentless grinding of the legal machinery I had set in motion. The drama was over. The cleanup had begun. I did not wait for my parents to apologize, and I did not wait for them to confess. I simply proceeded with the next step in the playbook. I filed a quiet title action, a specific type of lawsuit designed to permanently erase any cloud on the ownership of the property. It was a formal request to the court to declare, once and for all, that the forged deed was void and that I was the sole fee simple owner, because Judge Sutter had already made a finding of fraud in the eviction case. The quiet title action was less of a battle and more of a victory lap. The court clerk accepted the filings with a nod of recognition. The system, which had been weaponized against me just a week earlier, was now functioning as my shield. The district attorney's office moved with a speed that surprised even me. Usually, white-collar investigations take months, but when a judge hands a prosecutor a transcript containing a confession of conspiracy and forgery, it tends to skip the line. I met with an investigator 2 days after the hearing. I gave him everything. I gave him the badge logs. I gave him the metadata from the recorder's office showing the altered commission number on the notary stamp. I gave him the timeline. Janine Rourke was the first domino to fall. Her notary commission was suspended indefinitely pending the investigation. The investigator told me, off the record, that she was negotiating a plea deal. She was terrified of prison. and she was more than willing to trade the names of the people who had pressured her into the crime in exchange for leniency. My parents were no longer just disappointed beneficiaries. They were targets. The protective order hearing was brief. My parents did not show up. Their new lawyer, someone far less expensive than Calvin Rusk, submitted a filing stating they would not contest the order. Judge Sutter signed it without hesitation. It was a 5-year order. Evelyn and Grant Holmes were legally prohibited from coming within 100 yards of my home, my workplace, or my vehicle. They were prohibited from contacting me by phone, email, or third party. The door they had pounded on at 6 a.m. was now legally sealed shut. I changed the locks again, just to be sure. I upgraded the camera system to a cloud-based server with a 30-day retention policy. I bought a heavy steel file cabinet and bolted it to the floor of my study. I wasn't doing these things because I was living in fear. I was doing them because I was living in reality. I had learned that safety is not a feeling. It is a series of protocols. But the final piece of the puzzle did not come from a court or a camera. It came from the past. 1 week after the protective order was served, a courier arrived at my door. He carried a thick, creamy white envelope with the return address of a law firm I hadn't thought about in 5 years. Henderson. Miller Associates. It was my grandfather's estate planning firm. I signed for it. I took it into the kitchen and sat down. The envelope was heavy. It felt old. I opened it. Inside was a letter on linen paper, dated 6 years ago, 1 year before my grandfather died. Clipped to it was a sealed document labeled Contingency Memorandum, to be opened only in the event of a title dispute. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. It was written in my grandfather's spidery, forceful handwriting. My dear Piper, if you are reading this, it means they tried it. I hoped I was wrong. I prayed I was just a cynical old man. But if this envelope was triggered by the fraud alert I instructed Mr. Henderson to monitor, then my son and his wife have tried to switch the papers. I felt a chill run down my spine. He knew. He hadn't just suspected. He had known with enough certainty to pay a lawyer to watch the property records from beyond the grave. They will tell you it is about family. The letter continued. They will tell you I wanted the house to stay in the trust. That is a lie. I left the house to you because you are the only one who sees it as a home. To them, it is not a home. It is a lot. Read the attached memorandum. It explains why they are so desperate. I opened the memorandum. It was a dense legal document, but the summary at the top was clear. It detailed a zoning proposal that had been quietly circulating in city planning meetings for years. My neighborhood, specifically the block my house sat on, was slated for a potential overlay change. A commercial developer had been aggressively buying up options on the street, planning to rezone the area for a high-density luxury retail and condo complex. My grandfather had refused to sell. He had refused to sign the option. The memorandum laid it out in black and white. If the owner of the property signed the developer's option agreement, the land value would triple overnight. The house itself would be demolished, but the dirt underneath it was worth $2 million. But the developer had a deadline. They needed the assemblage completed by this spring. I stared at the paper. The pieces slammed into place with the force of a physical blow. My parents didn't want the house. They didn't want to live here. They didn't even care about the legacy. They wanted the signature. They wanted to steal the title long enough to sign the option agreement with the developer, lock in the $2 million payout, and then let the developer bulldoze the place. That was why they needed me out so fast. That was why they forged the deed. That was why my mother had screamed about the equity. They had likely already spent the advance in their heads. They saw $2 million sitting on the table, blocked by one stubborn daughter and a piece of paper. The family argument was a costume. The medical bills were a distraction. It was just greed. Pure, unadulterated, industrial-grade greed. They looked at the home where I had learned to walk, the home where my grandfather had taught me to read, and they saw a pile of cash waiting to be extracted. I put the letter down. I expected to feel angry. I expected to feel that hot, burning rage that had sustained me through the court hearings, but I didn't. I felt light, the weight of their guilt. which I had carried on my shoulders for 30 years, the guilt of being the difficult daughter, the guilt of not being enough, the guilt of causing conflict, evaporated. It wasn't me. It had never been me. I was just an obstacle to a transaction. I picked up the phone and called the number on the letterhead. I spoke to Mr. Henderson, my grandfather's old partner. "I received the package," I said. "I assumed you would," Mr. Henderson said. His voice was gravelly and kind. "Your grandfather was a very astute man. Piper, he left explicit instructions. Now that the contingency has been met, the firm is authorized to release the second phase of his bequest." "Second phase?" I asked. "He established a legal defense fund," Mr. Henderson explained. "He set aside $50,000 specifically to cover your legal fees in the event you had to defend the title against your parents. He didn't want you to spend a dime of your own money fighting them." I started to cry. I stood in my kitchen, holding the phone, and the tears finally came. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude. My grandfather had been gone for 5 years, but he was still protecting me. He had stood in the doorway between me and them, even from the grave. "Thank you," I choked out. "He was very proud of you." "Mr. Henderson said, "He knew you would fight." I hung up. I wiped my face. I walked into the living room. The afternoon sun was pouring through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The house was silent. It was a deep, resonant silence. There was no banging on the door. There were no angry voicemails. There were no manipulative emails waiting in my inbox. I had stripped the house of their influence. I had stripped the title of their lies. And now, thanks to the truth, I had stripped my heart of their expectations. I looked at the walls. This wasn't a $2 million development lot. This was my home, and it wasn't going anywhere. I didn't feel the need to call them and gloat. I didn't feel the need to drive past their house and wave the court order. That is what they would have done. They thrived on the noise, on the drama, on the back and forth. I was done with the noise. I had discovered the ultimate power of the record. When you have the truth, when you have the receipts, and when you have the law on your side, you don't need to scream. You just need to stand your ground and let the waves crash against you until they break. I walked to the front door and checked the lock one last time. It was solid. I turned back to the room, to the life I had built, and I smiled. It was a small, private smile. The eviction was canceled, the owners were gone, and the only thing left in the house was the truth. So, I have a question for you. If you woke up tomorrow and found your own parents standing on your lawn with a deputy and a lie, what would you do? Would you scream? Would you cry? Would you try to reason with people who see you as a paycheck? Or would you do what I did? Would you stay silent, collect the evidence, build the timeline, and let the weight of their own lies crush them in a court of law? Thank you so much for listening to my story. I really want to know what you think. Drop a comment below and tell me where you are listening from. I love reading about where you all are in the world. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about people fighting back and winning, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Lucy Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video get discovered by more people who need to hear it. Stay safe, stay smart, and keep your receipts.